We'll continue with Module 2, talking about the slope. So there's different ways to find the slope. If you're given an equation, you'll find the slope by putting the equation into slope-intercept form, the y equals mx plus b, remembering that the coefficient or the value in front of x is your slope. If you're given the coordinates of 2 points, x sub 1, y sub 1, and x sub 2, y sub 2, you will put those values into the slope formula, which is m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. If after doing so your answer is 0 in the numerator, then your slope is 0, because 0 over anything, except for 0 itself, is 0. Your graph would be a horizontal line. If when you plug in the values, your answer has 0 in the denominator, then your slope is undefined, because division by 0 is undefined. If you were to have graphed those 2 points, your graph would be a vertical line. Lines that are parallel have slopes that are equal. If line 1 had a slope of -2, then line 2 would also have a slope of -2 if the lines were parallel. Lines that are perpendicular have slopes that are both opposite and reciprocals of one another. That means if line 1 had a slope of -3, then line 2 would have a slope of positive 1/3. Notice the first one had a negative slope, so the second would have a positive slope. And the reciprocal of 3 is 1/3. We'll talk more about these in the following examples. So the first thing we're going to do is find the slope of a line given 2 points. So here we have -6 and 1. So what I like to do is I like to label the points. So I like to call the first one x sub 1 and y sub 1, and the second x sub 2 and y sub 2. So when you label them, it makes it much easier to put the values into the formula. And just so you recall the formula, slope is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So y sub 2 in this case is -8 minus y sub 1 is 1 over x sub 2, which is -7, minus x sub 1 is -6. So in the denominator, you have a double negative, which changes it to positive. So further simplifying, -8 minus 1 is -9. And -7 plus 6 is -1. A negative over a negative is a positive, so my slope would be +9. I wouldn't put the 1 in the denominator. The only time you want to do that is for graphing purposes only. So the problem will be marked wrong by the computer, even though it's not wrong to put 9 over 1. So what you want to do is always simplify. So 9 over 1, or -9 over -1 in this case, reduces to +9. So 9 would be your slope. Another example, we're going to find the slope of the points 6, 4 and -5, 4. Again, I would go ahead and label these x1, y1, x2, y2, and then I would write my formula out. Y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So y sub 2 is 4 minus y sub 1, which is also 4, over x sub 2, which is -5, minus x sub 1, which is 6. 4 minus 4 would be 0, and -5 minus 6 is -11. And remember, 0 in the numerator means your slope would be 0. Remember, when you write in your answer, 0 over -11 simplified is simply 0. You wouldn't have the -11 in the denominator for your answer. The next example, find the slope of a line parallel. So remember, lines that are parallel have the same slope. So the first thing that we're going to do is find the slope. So again, label x1, y1, x2, y2, and then write our formula. Slope equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Plugging in the values, y sub 2 is 2, so we have 2 minus y sub 1 is 6 over x sub 2, which is 24, minus x sub 1, which is 6. So 2 minus 6 is a negative 4. 24 minus 6 is 18. We can reduce. So our answer would be negative. We divide each by 2. So our slope would be negative 2/9. Now the line that's parallel, since the slopes are the same, would also have the exact same slope, which is negative 2/9. Our next problem, find the slope of a line perpendicular. Remember, lines that are perpendicular have slopes that are opposite and reciprocals of one another. So the first thing we're going to do is find the slope. So again, label x1, y1, x sub 2, y sub 2, and we write our formula. And then plug in the values. So y sub 2 is 8, minus y sub 1, which is 10, over x sub 2, which is 11, minus x sub 1, which is 3. So 8 minus 10 is negative 2, and 11 minus 3 is 8. This reduces to negative 1/4. So the slope of the original line is negative 1/4. So the line that's perpendicular would have to have a positive slope that's the reciprocal of 1/4. So the reciprocal of 1/4 is 4. And again, since our original slope was negative, the slope of the line that's perpendicular would have a slope that's positive 4. You wouldn't put the positive in your answer, just the 4. Opposite and reciprocal. It says a line K passes through the points -5, -7, 1, 35. A second line passes through the points -3, -33, and 3, 9. Is line K parallel to line H? Why or why not? So what you're going to do is, again, you're going to find the slope in two different problems. So the first one, again, x1, y1, x sub 2, y sub 2. So what we're going to do is find the slope of that first line. So again, I'm going to write down the formula and then plug in the values. So y sub 2 is 35 minus y sub 1 is -7. Notice I have that subtraction sign in between. Keep it there until after you write the second value, because again, this is going to change because that's a double negative. So in the denominator, x sub 2 is 1 minus x sub 1 is -5. Again, notice I'm going to have a double negative again. So 35 plus 7 is 42, and 1 plus 5 is 6, and 42 divided by 6 is 7. So now I'm going to find the slope of the second line. So again, x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. Plug it into our slope formula. So y sub 2 is 9 minus a -33. X sub 2 is 3 minus a -3. So again, we have double negatives. And 9 plus 33 is 42. And 3 plus 3 is 6. And 42 divided by 6 is 7. So are these lines parallel? Yes. Why? because they're exactly the same. If they're not the same, if one were positive and one were negative, then they would not be parallel lines. Next, we're going to be writing the equation of a line. So they're going to give you some information and want you to write the equation of the line. So depending on what they give you will be the steps that you follow. So first, you're going to find the slope. So if you're given the slope, you're just going to go on to step 2. If given the equation of a line, you're going to find the slope by putting the equation into slope-intercept form. And we'll talk about this more as we do some of these problems. If given the coordinates of 2 points, then you're going to use the slope formula like we just did in these previous problems. Okay, so step 1 is to find the slope depending on what information you're given. Step 2, put the information into point slope form. So point slope form is y, which is just the variable y. It's not a value, it's just y, minus y sub 1, which is a value that will be given in the problem, equaling m, remember, is your slope, times the quantity, so inside parentheses, x, and that's the variable x, minus some value that will be given. Okay, so the x and y that don't have that sub 1 with it, that will just be x and y, no numbers. But the x sub 1 and y sub 1 will be values that you'll take from the given problems. Okay, if you're given 2 points, you can choose either point to represent x sub 1 and y sub 1. And again, you'll see these in some of the examples coming up. Then you'll put it into the proper form. Usually if they don't ask, they want you to put it in slope-intercept form. So they want your answer in y equals mx plus b form. Or they could ask you to put it in standard form, which means ax plus by equals c. That means x and y are on one side of the equal sign and your constant is on the other. No fractions as a part of that answer, okay? So we'll talk about that too as we do some of the examples. So let's get right into an example. Now some of these we can do in one step. So if you keep in mind what slope-intercept form is, so let's just review real quickly. When I talk about slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. The m is your slope, and that's what we're going to find in step 1 if it's not already given. And the b is your y-intercept. And remember, y-intercept means the point is 0, comma, and some number representing y. So in this case, they're giving us the slope and the y-intercept. So there's no steps that we need to take. We can go straight into the answer. So our answer to this problem is simply y equals 9/5 x plus 4. Now, why could we go straight into this answer? Because it gave us the slope, and in slope-intercept form, this coefficient is the slope, plus or minus, depending on whether our y-intercept is positive or negative, our y-intercept. So they give us our y-intercept. So there's no more steps than to simply write it into slope-intercept form. That doesn't happen often, but when it does, be able to recognize, again, if they give you the slope and the y-intercept, you can go directly into slope-intercept form. Okay, so now let's take something that's a little bit different. So in this case, it says, find the slope and the y-intercept of the line. Okay, so the y-intercept is pretty easy. It's the point in which the graph goes through the y-axis, and it goes through at +2. So we know our y-intercept would have the coordinate 0 and +2, because remember, your x value is always 0 in your y-intercept. Now finding your slope. Okay, since our graph is going uphill as we move from left to right, we know our slope is positive. So all we need to do is count as we move from one point to the next. So when we start at 2, to get to the second point, our rise, we move up 1, and then we run or move to the right 2 units. So our slope would be 1/2. So again, you would start at our y-intercept, And to get to the other point, we moved up 1, which is positive 1. That would be our numerator. And to the right 2, so our denominator would be 2. So now again, just as we did in the previous problem, since we have the slope in the y-intercept, we can go directly into slope-intercept form. So remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So we have y equals, in this case, our slope is 1/2. Don't forget the x. So it's y equals 1/2 x, and our y-intercept is positive 2. So we write plus 2. Another problem. Find the slope and y-intercept of the line. Then use these to write the equation of a line. So again, let's find the y-intercept. So our y-intercept is at 0. So the coordinates would be 0, 0. Now our slope is positive again, because look at our graph is going uphill as we move from left to right. So what we're going to do is we're going to count how far up and over to get from our y-intercept to the next point. So our slope, to move from our y-intercept, we move up 5 and to the right 1. So up 5 and to the right 1. Remember, when we're expressing our slope, if our denominator is 1, we're just going to write it as an integer. So in this case, 5. So now let's write the equation. So again, we have the slope and we have the y-intercept. So we're going to go into slope-intercept form. So y equals mx plus b. So y would equal 5x plus, in this case, our y-intercept is 0. But for answer purposes, we know that if we add 0 to anything, it's just going to be that number. So we're going to leave it as just y equals 5x. Next example, find the slope and the y-intercept of the line, then use them to write the equation of a line. So again, let's start with our y-intercept. Our y-intercept is at 0, -2. To find our slope, we're going to count up from -2 to our next point. So from -2, we're going to rise 5 and run 2. So again, we look at slope-intercept form, and we plug in our values. We know our slope is 5/2. Don't forget the x, so it's 5/2 x. And in this case, our slope is -2, so we write -2. The next example says, write the given equation in slope-intercept form. Then identify the slope and the y-intercept. We did this before in graphing. So we're going to start out, remember, we're going to put it into y equals mx plus b form. So we're going to start off by moving the x on the other side of the equal sign. So we're going to subtract x, or 7x, from both sides. So keep the sign with the 9. In this case, it's negative. So that's -9y equals -7x minus 27. So we're solving for y. So we're going to divide both sides by -9. So that gives us y equals, a negative over a negative is positive, so that's 7/9 x. And -27 divided by -9 is a positive 3. So our slope is 7/9, and our y-intercept has the coordinates 0, 3. Okay, it's next example. For the given equation, find the slope and the y-intercept. So it's easier because it's already in slope-intercept form. So we know our slope is 5/6, and our y-intercept is 0, -3. Now we're going to graph. So remember, when we're graphing, we start at our y-intercept, which in this case is -3 on the y-axis. And from there, we rise 5 and run 6. So from, again, our y-intercept, we rise 5, go up 5, and to the right 6. And then we're going to connect these 2 points with a line. Next example, for the given equation, find the slope and y-intercept. So again, we need to put it into slope-intercept form. That's the y equals mx plus b form. So we start with 3x plus 2y equals 16. We want our y variable to be isolated, so we're going to subtract 3x from both sides. And then we're going to divide each term by 2 because we're solving for 1y. So y would equal -3/2 x plus 8. So again, we start at our y-intercept, which is +8. And our slope is -3 over +2. So from our starting point, we rise -3. That means we go down 3. And our denominator is positive, so we move to the right 2. And notice again, it should make sense that if our slope is negative, that our graph will be declining as we move from left to right. So our slope was -3/2, and our y-intercept as an ordered pair is 0, +8. Okay, so now it says find the equation of the line that passes through the given point and has the given slope. So notice in this case, the 0 is with the y and not the x. So this is not a y-intercept, it's an x-intercept. So we can't go directly into slope-intercept form. So remember, step 1 was to find the slope. Well, the slope is given by the formula m equals -1/5. Our second step is to put it into point slope form. So point slope form is y minus y⁻1 equals our slope times x minus x⁻1. So where does the y⁻1 and x⁻1 come from? The given point. So just as we did before, we'll label them x⁻1 and y⁻1. So let's plug in the values into the formula. So we have y minus y⁻1, which in this case is 0, equals the slope, which is given as -1/5, times x minus x⁻1, which in this case is +6. So on the left-hand side, y minus 0 is simply y. Now on the right-hand side, we're going to distribute. So -1/5 times x is merely -1/5 x. Now when I'm multiplying a fraction times a whole number, or an integer in this case, I'm going to put this over 1. So you're multiplying numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator. So -1 times -6 is +6. And then 5 times 1 is +5. So our final answer would be y equals -1/5 x plus 6/5. Our next example, find the equation of the line that passes through the given points. So again, step number 1 is always to find the slope. It didn't give us the slope in this case, it gave us 2 points. So we're going to have to use our slope formula to find the slope. So the first thing we did before, and we're going to do it again, x⁻1, y⁻1, x⁻2, y⁻2, and write our formula. Slope equals y⁻2 minus y⁻1 over x⁻2 minus x⁻1. So we're going to plug in the values. So y sub 2 is 6 minus y sub 1 is a negative 1. Again, it's very important that you put the subtraction symbol in between the two numbers, the 6 and the minus 1. And that's going to be over x sub 2, which is 4, minus x sub 1, which is negative 5. So in the numerator, we have a double negative. So 6 plus 1 is 7. And in the denominator, we have a double negative. 4 plus 5 is 9. So our slope is going to be 7/9. So after we find the slope, then we go into point slope form. And that's y minus y sub 1 equals the slope times x minus x sub 1. So we're going to plug in the values. Here we have 2 points. So you could either use -5 and -1 to plug in, or 4 and 6 to plug in for x and y. I'm going to go ahead and just use the -5 and -1. So this is going to be y minus y sub 1 is a -1 equals my slope, which I just found as 7/9, times x minus, and the x value is a -5. So in both cases, I have a double negative. So this would give me y plus 1 equals 7/9 times x plus 5. So from here, there's a couple of different ways to do it. I have found the easiest way to do it is to eliminate the fraction before I distribute. So in order to do that, I'm going to multiply both sides by the common denominator. In this case, the denominator is 9. So I'm going to multiply 9 times the 7/9, and I'm going to multiply the 9 times the y plus 1. You don't have to do it this way. It just makes it much easier. So on the left-hand side, I'm distributing the 9 times the y plus 1. So 9 times y is 9y, and 9 times 1 is 9. Now look what happens on the right-hand side. The 9's reduce. So that just leaves me 7 times the x plus 5, which gives me 7x when I distribute, and then 7 times 5 is 35. Okay, so next, I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides because I'm solving for y, and this gives me 9y equals 7x plus 26. My last step is to divide everything by 9. So my answer would be y equals 7/9 x plus 26 over 9. Again, not the only way to do it, but you'll find as you deal with these fractions, it may be easier for you to deal with these problems by eliminating the fraction prior to distributing. Our next example, find the equation of the line passing through the given pair of points. So again, the first thing that we have to do is to find the slope. So since we have 2 points, again, I'm going to label them x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. So the slope formula is m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Now we'll fill in the values. So y sub 2 is 7 minus y sub 1, which is 7, over x sub 2, which is -2, minus x sub 1, which is 6. So 7 minus 7 is 0, and -2 minus 6 is -8. And remember, 0 over anything is 0, so our slope is 0. So our next step is to put it into point slope form. So we have y minus y sub 1 equals our slope times x minus x sub 1. So y minus, and I'm going to choose the first point again, which would be 7. So it's y minus 7 equals our slope, which is 0, times x minus, in this case, 6. So my y minus 7 stays, and I'm going to distribute 0. Well, 0 times anything is just going to give me 0. So when I multiply 0 times x, that's 0. 0 times negative 6 is 0. So the right-hand side is 0. So what I'm going to do to finish is isolate my variable. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And my answer is y equals 7. And that should make sense to you, because when you look at the 2 points, both y values are 7. So it makes sense that y equals 7 would be the equation. My next example. Find an equation of the line parallel to 7x minus y equals 7 and passing through 5, 3. And now we're going to express the answer in standard form. So just as a review, standard form is ax plus by equals c. That just means x and y are on the same side. The constant is on the other side of the equal sign, and there's no fractions as a part of our answer. So first step is to find the slope. It doesn't give us 2 points, nor does it tell us what the slope is, but it gives us a line. And it says the line is 7x minus y equals 7. So to find the slope, remember you have to put it into slope-intercept form. So we're going to start by moving the 7x on the other side of the equal sign by taking its opposite. So this gives me negative 1y equals negative 7x plus 7. I'm solving for y, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. So this will give me y equals negative over negative is a positive. So that gives me a positive 7x, and positive 7 divided by negative 1 is negative 7. So remember, step number 1 is to find the slope. The slope is the value in front of the x. So the slope of this line is 7. Since the lines are parallel, the slope of the new line is also 7. So I'm going to use 7 to find the equation of the line. So again, after I find the slope, I go to point slope form. The point I'm going to use is 5 and 3, so that's x sub 1, y sub 1. Plug those into your formula. So I have y minus y sub 1, which in this case is 3, equals my slope, which I just found to be 7, times x minus 5. So I have y minus 3 equals, I'm going to distribute the 7 times the x and the minus 5. Now remember, to be in standard form, x and y need to be on the same side of the equal sign. So I'm going to move the 3 to the right-hand side by taking its opposite. And then I'm going to move the x over by taking its opposite as well. So the equation of the line would be negative 7x plus y equals negative 32. In some cases, they may want the x to be positive. If your answer doesn't match a multiple choice item, you may want to multiply the whole equation by negative 1 in order to change the sign. So then this would become 7x minus y equals 32. Now you can always check your answer. So this is the equations that I came out with as my answers. And either one is right if it's short answer. But sometimes if it's multiple choice, they'll give you either of these two answers. So what you can do is you can always check your answer. So if my answer is 7x minus y equals 32, and it passes through the point 5, 3, I should be able to plug in 5 for x and 3 for y, and this statement become true. So in other words, 7 times x, which is 5, minus 3 has to give me 32 if I've done the problem right. So 7 times 5 is 35, and 35 minus 3 is 32. So my answer does check out. So either one of the two answers is acceptable. So you just have to be able to come up with both, just in case you have it on a multiple choice type test.